tackling the tale of TikTok today. Hello, I'm Ken Ray, welcoming you into episode 191 of The Checklist, brought to you by Secure Mac. TikTok, harmless fun or existential threat to the U.S.? The answer you get depends on who you ask. We're asking security pro Patrick Wardle on this edition of The Checklist, brought to you by Secure Mac. There are a few reasons you might know the app TikTok. It's one of the most popular apps on the planet, so if you spend much time on the planet, you may have heard of it that way. It is huge with teens, so if you have any of those, you may know it from that. And it keeps coming up as a potential security threat, so really, there are lots of reasons you may have heard of TikTok. Patrick Wardle once worked for the NSA. He is currently an Apple security researcher for the enterprise device management firm Jamf. On his own, he runs a Mac security website called Objective-C.com. That's Objective-SEE. Objective-C.com. And he was kind enough to talk TikTok with me. So as far as I know, the only actual known security issue around TikTok is the fact that it was, and may still be, I'm not sure, but I know it was copying the iOS Clipboard. Is there a different, hard security issue that I've missed, or is that the only, hard issue that we know about so far?
There's another issue where I believe it was using kind of a loophole to enumerate what apps were installed on your device as well.
Oh, okay. I hadn't heard about that one. See, that's why I asked you that question, because it has looked to me like, well, I don't know. I want to talk about the clipboard thing, and then I actually want to back a little bit further to sort of the more socio-political something around TikTok. We talked here last week about the clipboard copying, but I would love to get your take on it as well. I think it was LinkedIn that said copying the clipboard was an accident. TikTok said it was trying to detect and defeat spammy behavior. I'm wondering about both of those answers. If we could jump to LinkedIn, which I know isn't why you were here initially, but does LinkedIn's "it was an accident" wash with you?
No, not at all. I don't know the exact reason why they were using it, but I would caveat there are legitimate reasons to access the pasteboard. I think, for example, Google Chrome might look for URLs, and if it looks like a URL, it suggests browsing to that. I think UPS app, for example, looks and sees if it's a tracking number, and it suggests if you want to track this package. So there are legitimate functionality, legitimate reasons why apps could do that. The issue is there's a whole group of apps. I think the researchers identified 50 plus that would access the pasteboard, the clipboard, without kind of providing reasons. And this is well-known apps, right? This was like the New York Times app, NPR, a whole variety of games, social media like TikTok, and, hotels.com. So really kind of well-known apps. So it's kind of like everyone's doing this. Doesn't make it right, doesn't make it okay. But again, there are legit scenarios, and I think if an application is accessing the pasteboard, they should explain why they're doing that. So LinkedIn's excuse that it was a mistake, I don't really buy that. I mean, maybe that was the case, but it's likely just they're perhaps using it for some other purpose. I believe they did say, though, they're not capturing and transmitting what was on the pasteboard, so at least it sounded like it was all just done locally, and perhaps this was the case with TikTok as well. So we're kind of stuck in the middle where you're like, okay, this is an ideal behavior. It might not be malicious. It might not be like sending it to a server in China, but we also don't specifically know that. So we're kind of, as users, kind of stuck in the middle. And at least with iOS 14, there's now a notification about this. So this issue, which has kind of been common practice for a long while, like I said, all these apps, basically everyone does it. Now that is kind of coming to light, which I think is a good thing.
Let me, I put this question to a developer last week when we had Brett Terpstra on, but let me just, again, I'm more than happy to have more than one person answer the question. I accidentally copied the clipboard. I mean, is this an easy thing to accidentally do, or is that just, as you say, is it somebody looking back going, yeah, probably we shouldn't have done that? We mean accident in the more esoteric sense, not in the we accidentally wrote code that did this.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think there was any accident per se.
Right.
I think maybe the accident was, oh, yeah, we shouldn't have been doing this. Or, the one scenario, if we're going to give them the benefit of the doubt, was maybe it was used in a debug build, but somehow made it into production. Or, it was a feature that they were planning on using to, for some legitimate purpose and, didn't take it out or something. But I more just think it's kind of an interesting feature of the operating system that provided them more data about user activity, which, let's be honest, this is what basically all apps do, right? Especially the free ones. They want to gather as much information about you, not necessarily for surreptitious purposes, but usually, for user behavior, right? That's the value. What are my users reading? What are they doing? Where are they located at? So, you pull apart any free app, it basically collects as much data as you can. And that's kind of really just the price we unfortunately pay for these free applications. So, I saw a great quote that was kind of like, TikTok isn't doing anything more than like Facebook does, but that's not a good thing either way, right?
Right.
So, but I don't believe there was a mistake. I don't think, LinkedIn, I think that was kind of their marketing team, perhaps.
Gotcha. I didn't figure we would be able to get through this episode without talking about Facebook, and we may revisit them. I don't know. I will tell you, though, the reason I started with the Clipboard thing was because that was the one thing about which I knew. I mean, you mentioned the other one about finding out the other apps that are on your phone or on your device. I've been fixated on the Clipboard thing because that was the one that I heard about. Because other concerns around TikTok are, I mean, I guess they're bigger than that, but they're also sort of nebulous. And I'm hoping you can help us out with some of what's going on there. I mean, I'm wondering, first of all, are we concerned about TikTok because it's an audio video app that's broadcasting stuff about us? Or are we concerned about TikTok because it's an audio video app broadcasting stuff about us with its roots in China?
I think it's a combination of both. I think the China connection is something that we can't ignore. And this is a really interesting topic talking about app security and app privacy. And you have an app like TikTok, which probably needs access to your contacts. It's kind of a social media app. So again, there's legitimate reason why it would access that. Probably might need your location to suggest, certain things, access to your photos, videos. So anyway, there's a lot of legitimate reasons why it needs all these accesses and permissions. And so the $1 million question is, well, what is it doing with these? And if we look at other apps, we kind of have the whole gamut, where on one end we have an app like TikTok, not to be confused with TikTok. TikTok turned out to be a government spying application used by the Emirati government. The New York Times was tipped off by an anonymous individual in the United States American Intelligence Service. And so I kind of took a look at this app and did some research with the New York Times. And what we found was, it basically was kind of collecting all the same information that a lot of other apps were doing. But then it was, sending this information off to, these back-end servers. And so at that point, it's like, okay, where is that data going and who's doing what with it? And so, that's kind of one end of the spectrum where we have data or intel from the intelligence agency saying, well, the people who have access to the data on the back end are using that for nefarious purposes. But if we didn't have that information, really there's not anything inherently suspicious with the application per se. If you're looking at, the binary code, the stuff that runs on the phone, it's just collecting as much information about the user, and a lot of that is for legitimate purposes. So now we kind of shift gears and we're looking at TikTok, and we're seeing it doing things like enumerating what apps are installed on your device. That's something that Apple seeks to prevent. There's kind of like loopholes to get around that. And you're kind of like, well, why do they need this information? And if we start getting like perhaps super creative, we can say like, well, if the Chinese government is behind this, if you have other apps on your phone that perhaps are related to your sexual preference or your political views, like that could be very relevant information in the wrong hands. Or, this is just, again, collecting data about the users so you can target them better with advertising, right? If you know they have an app that allows them to I have a dog, it has a GPS tracker that hooks up to my phone, so I have an app for that, right? If an app another app can determine that, they know I have a dog, so now they can start showing me dog toy advertisements. So the question, and I don't have a good answer for this, is what is the data that all these apps are collecting, TikTok included, how is that data being used? Is it used just for advertising, which still isn't good, but it doesn't really bother me if someone's showing me dog toy advertisements? Or is there some government behind this that is using this in select scenarios to, for example, perhaps maybe just collect intel about potential targets of interest?
See, that's where, and I feel like I'm starting back at zero on something. So years ago, my mom was using the same password for everything. Now, years and years ago, so was I, but we're talking like 20 years ago when I was doing that. I mean, for my mom, it was as recently as, well, more recent than that, I want to say.
Yeah.
And the thing is, when I started talking to her about it, she said, well, nobody cares because it's just me. I don't have any information. And the thing that I've come to understand, especially doing this show, she's right. Nobody cares about her.
She's right.
But it's not about her. It is about her information. It's about if we can harvest as much stuff as we possibly can, there may be a way to go back through it and do something. And so then when you say TikTok is spying on you, my thought is, so what? Because who am I? Nobody, as far as China is concerned. But I have to reset my head on this and say, well, okay, but one grain of rice is not a meal, 1,000 is, or, whatever, or one macaroni noodle is nothing, but, a whole box of them is. I'm one of the macaroni noodles. I mean, is that what the concern should be? Not my personal information, but the information in aggregate that I contribute to or take away from? Or am I being naive and really, while I right now am nobody, keeping a file on me personally one day may benefit somebody else?
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting point. I think that's kind of the whole conundrum of this because, TikTok is kind of singled out in this scenario. I think one, because it's, there's a China connection, which there are some valid security concerns based on, the Chinese government's approach and past activities. Also, there's a little bit of, I would say, xenophobia. It's China, right? So, And also it's incredibly popular. But, there's a countless other apps, Facebook, or, pick your favorite social media app that's likely gathering the same amount of information. So the question becomes do we just roll over and accept this? Or do we kind of take a stand against this? And you're right. The average American is probably going to say, hey, I don't have anything to hide. I don't really care if they have this information. And my retort is to them is well, do you shut the door when you go to the bathroom? And it's yeah. So well, you do care about your privacy a little bit, even if you don't have anything to hide. And I think, in this scenario, I think if average teenager using TikTok, you're right. I don't think anybody really cares about that data. In aggregate, I think there's maybe more information, especially to advertisers. But thinking back to kind of other government operations, and again, not saying TikTok is, but if we look, for example, at TikTok, it's the goal there was kind of just a mass surveillance operation where you just gather tons of information, as you mentioned. Then in aggregate, you start making interesting connections. For example, see who's talking to whom, and then there's going to be some people of interest that maybe you have some a priori knowledge of, and then going after that specific individual, you have all this aggregate data. You can now start tracking and finding other links. So again, your mom is right in the case that, say the Chinese government is spying on everybody, or the U.S. government, or whoever. Individual, they aren't really going to care about her. But if she's talking to someone that they are interested to her, then maybe she joins that sphere of interest. So, what governments or advertisers will do is they'll just collect as much data as possible because, the more, the better. And then you can start mining that data, both for advertising purposes or, again, if there's a government or an intelligence agency behind this, then that's where it kind of becomes interesting. And so this data just feeds into them. They're more specific or more targeted attacks. And this is, common data collection practice that probably, every government is doing. And again, I'm not saying that these applications are necessarily backed by the government, but that's often why just gathering as much data as you can becomes interesting, right? Eventually you find links, or down the road, if someone becomes interested, you kind of have all this past data.
TechCrunch had Secretary of State Mike Pompeo saying that the U.S. is certainly looking at banning TikTok over concerns that it could be used by the Beijing government as a surveillance and propaganda tool. Not to repeat myself, and I think you may have actually touched on this a bit. I mean, is this is this a real concern? Is this a political talking point? Is this something that you personally would be worried about? Or is this, as you mentioned, the xenophobia and China and, pitting one against the other?
Yeah.
Because you mentioned Facebook earlier, and I'm sorry, I haven't heard anything that you've said about TikTok yet that rises to a lot of the levels that we've heard about Facebook, too. The only difference is one's on one side of the Pacific and one's on the other.
Yeah, exactly. So I think when our government talks about it, it's largely a political talking point. Our current administration is rather anti-China. So I think it fits very well into kind of their messaging and what they're kind of perpetuating to their supporters. I think you raised a very excellent question because, again, it's all about, we kind of know data is being collected, right? And we've almost maybe accepted that. And, for example, TikTok isn't doing anything incredibly out of the ordinary. I mean, it's accessing the clipboard. It's saying it's just doing it locally. There are hundreds of other apps doing the same thing. So to signal them out is a little bit unfair, but they're popular, so they're going to take a little more heat. And then obviously the China connection. But it really does come, really where something becomes the issue is who's using that data. So, if it turns out that a social media app like TikTok is kind of backed by the UAE government, okay, that app then becomes a problem, and the data it's collecting then becomes a problem. And that's why, Apple banned that app from the App Store, right? That app specifically wasn't doing anything nefarious, but it was kind of the back end, which was the problem. So when our government kind of talks about TikTok and, Chinese government, I don't think there has been anything tying it directly to the Chinese government. And if there were, that would be a problem. And you mentioned Facebook. It's probably collecting the same amount of information. But, at least in our country, there's a lot of legal protections afforded to companies where the government can't just show up and grab the data. So, I would say, if you're, working at an intelligence agency or you're working in the military, maybe don't install TikTok on your phone because, there is a possibility that, that information might be useful in the wrong hands. So I think that's probably, and that goes to be said for any apps that are maybe developed in foreign countries. It's just good policy if you're a person who's handling classified information or has a job that's tied to national security interests, careful what you put on your phone. The average American teenager, though, I don't see any security risk per se.
It was a weird thing that happened last week. I think it was on Friday. And it was just so bizarre. So Amazon sent out an email to all of its employees, or some of its employees, not all, saying, hey, if you want to keep using Amazon Mail, you're going to need to get TikTok off your phone. And then an hour or two later, Amazon issued a thing. They were like, yeah, that email was sent out by accident. And it's sort of like, okay, but that email was still written.
Yeah.
It's just kind of odd. It's
Well, I think there's a lot of kind of knee-jerk reaction. There was some initial, because when, someone makes a claim, hey, TikTok is accessing your pasteboard, that seems really, really problematic.
Yeah.
And it could be, right? But, for example, my understanding is on iOS, the application can only access the pasteboard when it's in use, when it's, the front. So it can't be sitting in the background sniffing everything you're copying and pasting. And again, it's what is it doing with that app? What is it doing with that data, right? If it's just using it locally to do some, I think TikTok said they were looking for spammy behavior. I don't really know what that means or if that's true, but if that pasteboard data is not being persistently stored or transmitted to a remote server, I mean, it's really not that much of a security privacy issue. So the problem is, right, the claim, TikTok accessing pasteboard, versus the reality, and I'm not sure what that reality is. There's a huge spectrum between something being a valid privacy and security concern or something that's just, not ideal, but really doesn't have that much of an impact. So, I mean, maybe Amazon just kind of had more of that knee-jerk reaction, and then based on some continuing investigation and more information, decided that, all the other apps are doing this. We haven't seen it doing anything super nefarious, so we're just going to, kind of let this one ride.
So on my other show, Mac OS Ken, or one of my other shows, I guess, on Mac OS Ken, I tend to be really focused on the business side of stuff. And so I wasn't sure if this is something I would bring up here, but you and I were talking about it earlier, so I'll go ahead and say really quickly. A piece from Business Insider says TikTok is owned by the colossal Chinese company ByteDance, a connection that has raised concerns about how much access and influence the Chinese government has to user data and content moderation. To appease concerns, ByteDance recently appointed a new CEO for TikTok. His name is Kevin Mayer. He is an American ex-Disney streaming exec who is now based out of TikTok's LA offices. Is that meant to allay your fears, my fears? Is this just a PR move? I mean, what does all this do for you in terms of the scandal, if you want to call it that, and the TikTok app?
I think it's interesting. I think this is purely a business move. TikTok, I would say their biggest issue right now is this kind of China connection where Americans are kind of freaking out that they're owned by a Chinese company. So what they're trying to do is really distance themselves as much as possible. Hiring a well-known business exec from the U.S. is kind of a step in this direction. So, I think they take another steps. For example, they store just data, on servers outside China, but they're going to do everything they can to really, hopefully, be transparent and convince the public, or kind of do this PR campaign that again distances themselves from China as much as possible. Because as we talked earlier, right, there's people in the U.S. government administration that are making this point and threatening, or at least talking about potentially banning TikTok. And for business, that would be kind of a death knell. So obviously, they're going to try to proactively do as much as they can to separate themselves from any China connection that's real or even simply just perceived.
Security experts as fun police. More with Patrick Wardle in a moment. But first, a word about MacScan 3 from Secure Mac. Macs aren't what they used to be. People who years ago thought they weren't real computers or that they were overpriced toys now use Macs every day. They trust them every day with important work and lots of personal information. As the Mac has grown, so has its status as a target. Bad guys want to steal the information stored on them. You can guard against that with MacScan 3. MacScan 3 is a great defense against malicious software attacks aimed at your Mac. It's developed by Secure Mac, trusted names in computer security and developers of exceptional security software for over 20 years. MacScan 3 detects and removes Mac malware, catches keyloggers, removes tracking cookies, and provides full-range or targeted scanning, all without crowding up your hard drive or slowing down your machine. Sign up for a free 30-day trial today at securemac.com/MacScan. Then once you decide to buy it for less. You can take a little off your subscription to MacScan 3 with offer code CHECKLIST. Try it first. Watch it kick those tracking cookies to the curb. Then when you're ready to buy for less with offer code CHECKLIST at securemac.com/MacScan. Now more with security expert Patrick Wardle. So all this jogged something in my memory, and I went and looked it up yesterday, getting ready to talk to you today. And I can't believe that it was literally actually 1 year ago this week, this thing that I was reminded of. It was 1 year ago this week that the world was going gaga for the Face app. This was the one that, it had been around for a while, but it just really caught fire last summer. This was the one where you could take a picture of yourself and make yourself look older, which I say, give it time, but okay. Take a picture of yourself and it's like, here's exactly right. I now have those lines under my eyes that I used to say, wow, when am I going to get those? Yeah, I got them. And creases in my forehead. Please. Yes, please give me an app for that. Thank you. Because It won't look worse. And for those of you who don't remember, though, there was actually a bit of a scandal that came up around it. Scandal, brouhaha, I don't know what to say. Here's what Business Insider said last year. FaceApp's terms of service give the company a license to use photos and other information uploaded by users for commercial purposes, including their names, likenesses, and voices. The terms of the service also say that FaceApp may continue to store user data after it's deleted from the app. The company said the data could be retained to comply with certain legal obligations, but there's no limitation on how long the data could be kept. Furthermore, FaceApp's privacy policy says that all information collected by the app can be stored and transferred to whichever countries FaceApp and its affiliates operate from. This means user photos and app data could be stored in Russia and countries where the app's development team, could be stored in Russia, the country where the app's development team is based. Now, these apps are obviously not tied together, TikTok and the Face app. But I couldn't help thinking about Face app when all this came up about TikTok. I'll tell you honestly, the one that I've wondered about, and it's the only one of these that I can think of that I've ever been drawn into, no pun intended, it was Draw Something. There was one weekend where everybody I knew was playing Draw Something, and I'm a sucker for like Win, Lose, or Draw or Pictionary or stuff like that. Yeah. So I got drawn into it too, and I might have played for like 16 hours that weekend. And then it got incredibly boring because they didn't change, the things you could draw and stuff like that. I mean, it was really just a viral experience. Now, I don't know that anything was done with that data, but I don't know that nothing was done with that data either. And it just hit like a wildfire. I guess what I'm asking, Patrick, is can we never have fun again?
Unfortunately, I don't think so. I mean, not to be a buzzkill, but, because it's like you said, say you're freaked out that TikTok is tied to China. And so you're like, okay, I'm not going to use that. But, there's all these other social media apps that are, collecting just as much data. I'm sure if we read Facebook's privacy policy or Instagram, or any other social media app, a lot of the content you generate or your activities is basically, they say, hey, we're gonna leverage this, we're gonna use this, and that's what funds these applications. That's why Facebook is paying billions of dollars when it acquires Instagram, right? It's access to the user data, and luckily, in the case of Instagram and Facebook, it's all about advertising, right? So that's easier to swallow, right? It's like, okay, well. But, I think it was interesting, there's kind of a quote or an observation that kind of was talking about the book 1984 and surveillance, and it was not really the government that's doing it, it's these advertising companies. And they really know, so much about you that a lot of times, and we've all had this experience where we think Facebook or Instagram or whatever app has to be listening to us because the ads are sometimes so specific. And the scary thing is they're able to provide such relevant data without actually having to listen in, like turn on your microphone or something, which again, to me is almost scarier because it shows how much they know about you. So, to answer your question, you can't have fun. I mean, I don't have a good answer for that. I mean, hopefully, you can still go outside and play in the woods, and that should be fine. But I think we just have to acknowledge that a lot of the applications we're using, especially the free ones and the social media ones, they're free for a reason. And the price is basically your privacy. And I think like we talked earlier, the average user unfortunately just doesn't care about that. And for a lot of social media apps, Facebook and Instagram, there's hopefully no nefarious purpose behind them. An app like the face swapping app or the one you talked about, the Face app, again, this data is going to Russia, right? And so not to get like all paranoid, but you can envision a scenario where, the government or Russia is now building a database of, faces. And, combined with the app's location, maybe you can say, okay, I want to go in and do a query, if you have all this information, for, people in the Fort Meade area, which is where the NSA is, who are using this app and see their pictures. And now you might be able to build a database of employees of certain, intelligence agencies. And then, you can feed that into a system at the border where, if someone comes in on a passport, now you have the ability to face match, and perhaps that person is now of interest. And maybe you approach them with a suitcase with $1 million and say, hey, I know you work for the U.S. government. We're either going to not let you leave the country, or we're going to give you $1 million if you just, tell us a little bit about what you do. So granted, this is somewhat of a far-fetched scenario, but it's also a scenario that could come to fruition based on this information. So again, I really think that kind of the middle ground is, if you're working in a field where, you need to be traveling anonymously, or the type of work you're doing is sensitive, be very careful about what applications you're installing on your phone. Again, if you're just an average consumer, I feel like, especially now in 2020, there's bigger things to worry about. But still, I think it's important for people to be aware that you're basically giving away all this data, and you don't know where it's going and who's using it.
Well, I'm not going to say you made me feel better, but you kind of put my mind at ease, I think. I don't know. We'll come back in about a year and try to figure out what happened. I
think that the TikTok, this is likely an application that's, doesn't necessarily have any nefarious purpose per se. We don't know, and that's kind of the issue. But again, they're probably making, I don't know how TikTok makes money. Do they sell ads, or do they
That's a great question. Yeah, we need to ask somebody's kids, because it doesn't sound like neither you nor I could tell us.
Because if they have a robust business model where they're raking in millions of dollars, it almost makes no sense for them to compromise that business model by perhaps shady things to attract users, right? So I always try to look at the motivations of that. It was interesting because TikTok, the government spy operation in the UAE, it was too good to be true, right? The government banned all the social media and audio apps, introduced this amazing free application that everyone started using with no ads and no business model. And so you're like, okay, well, this is obviously too good to be true, right? It was just obvious in retrospect. Whereas, an app like Facebook and Instagram, right, they show ads. So it's okay, my data is being collected so that they can, they have a well-defined revenue model. So that helps kind of alleviate for me kind of to generally come to peace with things. Because, for example, Facebook isn't going to turn on your microphone to listen to you, because that would get them banned and compromise a very lucrative business. So in a way, that kind of in a roundabout way gives me peace of mind, because if I know how apps are making money off me, then it's kind of, you can generally ascertain what they're doing with your data. And if they're making a lot of money, they're unlikely to use that data in illegal ways to jeopardize their successful money-making scheme.
Well, like I say, I don't know that it makes me feel better, but I feel better knowing a bit more, or at least thinking about it in a different way.
Yeah.
Patrick Wardle, it is really just a pleasure to talk to you, and I hope we can have you back again sometime.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate you reaching out. And always fun to talk nerdy about security, privacy, and all sorts of good things.
You can keep up with Patrick a few ways. Follow him on Twitter at Patrick Wardle. That's Wardle at Patrick Wardle to follow him on Twitter. Now, I mentioned earlier that he's got a website, objectivec.com. He blogs a lot there about Mac security, and he also has a lot of tools, free and open source, for both end users and security people. That is objective-c.com. And thanks again to Patrick Wardle for joining us this week. If you're looking for more security news and how-tos, the place to look is securemac.com/checklist. There you'll find notes for this show, for the last show we did, for all the shows that we've done, and you can listen to all the shows right there as well. It all starts in one place, securemac.com/checklist. If you have a question you would like to ask or a topic you would like to hear us hit, our email address is checklist@securemac.com. That address again is checklist@securemac.com. And if you can't remember that, please do remember this. You're listening to The Checklist, brought to you by Secure Mac. And we'll talk to you next week.